At exactly 2:47 a.m., the security cameras caught someone stealing from my house. The footage was blurry, but I recognized her instantly. Lena Brooks, the foreign chef I hired just weeks ago. She moved carefully through the kitchen, checking over her shoulder, wrapping something in a towel like she'd done this before. I'd seen this pattern too many times. Staff start small. Then they get bold. They always think the cameras won't catch them. My finger hovered over the button to call security. One press, and she'd be gone. But then she turned. Not toward the exit, not toward the staff quarters. She walked straight into the West Wing. The one part of the house no employee was allowed to enter. The one place I hadn't stepped into myself in over a year. My mother's wing. The screen glitched as she disappeared down the corridor. For the first time since I took over this estate, something tightened in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was fear. The intercom crackled. "Sir, should I have her removed?" I didn't answer. I kept staring at the empty hallway, realizing that whatever she was doing in that wing, it wasn't about stealing food anymore. "Not yet," I finally said. "I want to see what she's really doing first." Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Before we dive into the story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, this story will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last second. Now, let's begin. 3 weeks earlier, Lena Brooks had stepped off a plane at Incheon International Airport with nothing but 2 suitcases and a contract she'd signed without reading carefully enough. The agency had promised her a prestigious position as a private chef for a wealthy family in Busan. They'd said it was an opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of job that could transform her career. What they hadn't mentioned was that the family she'd be working for operated in shadows, that the mansion she'd be cooking in felt more like a fortress than a home, or that she'd be walking into a place where secrets festered behind every locked door. The estate sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, all glass and steel and cold modern architecture that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. When the car dropped her off at the service entrance, Lena had felt the weight of the place immediately. It wasn't just a house. It was a statement of power, of money so vast it had stopped meaning anything except control. Mrs. Han had been waiting for her, a severe woman in her 50s with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She'd looked Lena up and down with barely concealed contempt, her eyes lingering on Lena's blonde hair, her foreign features, everything that marked her as an outsider. "You'll work under Mr. Kwon in the kitchen," Mrs. Han had said in clipped English, not bothering with pleasantries. "You follow his instructions exactly. You don't ask questions. You don't speak to the family. You definitely don't go wandering around the house." She'd paused then, her voice dropping. "Especially not the West Wing. That area is completely off limits. Do you understand?" Lena had nodded, too jet-lagged and overwhelmed to do anything else. She'd followed Mrs. Han through a maze of corridors, all of them pristine and empty, until they reached the staff quarters. Her room was small but functional, a bed, a desk, a window that looked out onto the service courtyard. It felt like a cell. The next morning, Lena had met Mr. Kwon, the head kitchen supervisor, a man who communicated primarily through grunts and dismissive gestures. The other kitchen staff were all Korean, and they spoke rapidly to each other in a language Lena didn't understand, occasionally glancing at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to resentment. She was the outsider, the foreigner who'd probably taken a job from someone's cousin or friend. They made sure she knew it. They gave her the worst shifts, the most tedious prep work. While the other chefs crafted elaborate dishes for the mysterious family upstairs, Lena spent her days peeling vegetables and scrubbing pots. She'd been hired as a chef but treated as a dishwasher. Still, she kept her head down and worked. She needed this job. She'd burned too many bridges back home, and this contract was her chance to start over. But something was wrong in this house. Lena felt it in the way the staff moved, always careful, always watching. She heard it in the silences that fell when she entered a room. And she saw it most clearly in the food. Every evening, Mr. Kwon prepared elaborate meals, dishes that belonged in Michelin-starred restaurants. Wagyu beef with truffle reduction, fresh lobster with saffron butter, delicate pastries that took hours to create. And every morning, Lena watched as those same meals came back to the kitchen virtually untouched. Perfect plates of food, carefully arranged, that someone had barely looked at before sending back. Madame Seo, one of the younger kitchen assistants, had whispered to her one afternoon, noticing Lena's confusion. "Mr. Park's mother. She's very ill. Dementia. She doesn't eat anymore." But that didn't make sense. If someone was too ill to eat, why prepare such elaborate meals? Why waste so much food, so much effort? Lena had worked in elder care facilities before she'd trained as a chef. She'd seen dementia patients, had helped feed them, had learned the signs. Something about this explanation felt wrong. She started paying attention. Really paying attention. She noticed that the trays going up to the West Wing were always handled by Mrs. Han personally or by a young nurse named Jiwon. She noticed that the portions coming back were sometimes arranged slightly differently, as if someone had pretended to eat without actually consuming anything. She noticed the waste, the sheer volume of expensive food being thrown away every single day. And then one night, during her late shift, she'd seen something that changed everything. Mrs. Han had brought back a dinner tray, the food completely untouched as usual. But instead of scraping it into the waste bin, she'd simply dumped the entire plate into the trash with a violence that seemed personal. She'd muttered something in Korean under her breath, something that sounded like disgust, and then she'd caught Lena watching. "What are you staring at?" Mrs. Han had snapped. "Get back to work." Lena had turned away, but the image stayed with her. That wasn't the behavior of someone caring for an ill family member. That was the behavior of someone who resented their job, who maybe even resented the person they were caring for. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below, thinking about the woman in the West Wing. Madame Seo, Park Jae-min's mother. A woman who was supposedly too ill to eat, too confused to function, locked away in a part of the house no one was allowed to enter. The next day, Lena made a decision. It was reckless, possibly dangerous, but she couldn't ignore what her instincts were telling her. During her afternoon break, when most of the staff were busy with dinner preparations, she slipped away from the kitchen and headed toward the West Wing. The corridor was dimly lit, lined with closed doors. Lena's heart hammered as she moved deeper into the forbidden section of the house. She half expected alarms to sound, for security guards to appear and drag her away. But nothing happened. The hallway remained silent except for the soft sound of her footsteps on the marble floor. She found a room at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Lena could see a figure in a bed. She hesitated, her hand on the door frame, knowing that if she went through with this, there would be no going back. Then she heard a soft sound, almost like a whimper. Lena pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was large but oppressively dark, the curtains drawn against the daylight. It took Lena's eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The woman in the bed was skeletal, her skin stretched tight over her bones, her eyes sunken deep into her face. She looked like she was dying, like she'd been dying for a very long time. But those eyes were clear. Confused, frightened, but clear. Not the clouded gaze of someone lost to dementia. "Please," the woman whispered in accented English, her voice barely audible. "Water." Lena moved without thinking, finding a glass on the bedside table and bringing it to the woman's lips. Madame Seo drank desperately, her hands shaking as she tried to hold the glass herself. "Who are you?" Madame Seo asked when she'd finished, studying Lena's face with an intensity that belied her physical weakness. "I'm Lena. I work in the kitchen. I'm a chef." Something flickered in Madame Seo's eyes. "They told you I'm sick? Crazy." Lena nodded slowly, her mind racing. This woman wasn't confused at all. She was starving, yes, clearly malnourished and weak. But her mind was sharp, her words coherent. "I'm not," Madame Seo said, and tears began to roll down her hollow cheeks. "They want me weak. They want me quiet. The doctor, he was paid. Paper signed. My son, he doesn't know. He doesn't visit. He doesn't see." "Who's doing this to you?" Lena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "All of them. The staff. That woman, Mrs. Han. They bring food, beautiful food, then take it away. Sometimes they let me eat a little. Most times, no. They say the doctor ordered liquid diet only. That solid food will make me sick. But I'm hungry. I'm so hungry all the time." Lena felt a cold rage building in her chest. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. Systematic. Someone was slowly starving this woman while maintaining the illusion that she was being cared for. "I have to go," Lena said, her mind already working. "But I'm going to help you. I promise." "They'll fire you," Madame Seo warned. "Or worse. These are dangerous people." "I know," Lena said. And she did. She'd heard the whispers about Park Jae-min, about his business dealings that existed in legal gray areas, about connections to people who made problems disappear. She was putting herself at enormous risk. But she couldn't walk away. Not now. Over the next week, Lena established a routine. She started small, taking scraps that wouldn't be missed. Bones that would have been thrown away. Vegetables, trimmings. Ingredients just past their prime that Mr. Kwan would have tossed. She worked late into the night, after the other staff had gone to their quarters, making rich bone broths, nutrient-dense soups, soft foods that could rebuild someone's strength without overwhelming a starved digestive system. She hid the food in towels, in containers she'd brought from her own supplies. And in the darkest hours before dawn, she made her way to the West Wing and fed Madame Seo. The first few times were terrifying. Every shadow seemed like a security guard, every sound like approaching footsteps. But slowly, Lena learned the patterns of the house, when the cameras cycled, when the guards changed shifts, when she could move with the least chance of being caught. And Madame Seo began to improve. Not dramatically, not quickly, but steadily. Color returned to her face. Her hands stopped shaking quite so badly. She could sit up in bed for longer periods. They talked during these secret visits, whispered conversations that revealed the depth of the tragedy unfolding in this house. Madame Seo had been the matriarch of the family, a strong woman who'd helped build the Park fortune from nothing. But as she'd aged and her son had taken over the business, she'd become inconvenient. She'd asked too many questions about where the money was coming from, had threatened to go to authorities about practices she couldn't accept. So they'd found a doctor willing to declare her incompetent, had her declared legally unable to manage her own affairs, and locked her away where she couldn't cause problems. "My son," Madame Seo said one night, her voice breaking. "Jaemin. He was a good boy once. Kind. But the business, it changed him. He became cold. And when they told him I was sick, he believed them. He never came to see for himself. He just signed the papers they put in front of him and let them lock me away." Lena wanted to hate Park Jae-min, this man who'd abandoned his mother. But she also understood in a strange way. She'd seen how the staff operated, how Mrs. Han controlled information, how carefully they'd constructed their lies. If Jaemin never visited, if he only saw the reports they showed him, if he trusted the people running his household, why would he question what they told him? But understanding didn't mean forgiveness. And it didn't change what Lena had to do. The problem was that her secret couldn't last. Mrs. Han had noticed the missing inventory, small as it was. She'd started asking questions, conducting random inspections of the kitchen. Mr. Kwon had been given orders to tighten security, to watch for theft. One afternoon, Nurse Ji-won pulled Lena aside in the hallway. The young nurse had always been kind to Lena, one of the few staff members who'd treated her with basic respect. "You need to be careful," Ji-won said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Mrs. Han is watching you. She thinks you're stealing. She's reviewing all the security footage." "I haven't stolen anything," Lena said, which was technically true. She'd only taken things that would have been thrown away. "I know what you're doing," Ji-won said, and Lena's blood ran cold. "I work in the West Wing sometimes. I see her. Madame Seo. She's getting stronger." Ji-won's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to help her once. Brought her extra food. Mrs. Han found out and threatened to have me deported. My visa, it's sponsored by the family. If they cancel it, I have to leave Korea. My whole family depends on the money I send home." "So, you just let them starve her?" Lena couldn't keep the anger out of her voice. "I'm a coward," Ji-won said simply. "But you're not. So please be careful. They're watching everything now." That night, Lena almost stopped. She stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., the container of soup she'd made cooling on the counter, and seriously considered walking away. She could finish her contract, go back home, pretend she'd never seen what was happening in the West Wing. She tried to help, and that was more than most people would have done. But then she thought of Madame Seo's face, of the way she'd looked when she'd first had real food after months of near starvation. She thought of the stories the old woman had told her about raising Jaemin alone after her husband died, about sacrificing everything to build a life for her son. And Lena knew she couldn't stop. Not yet. She picked up the container and headed toward the West Wing, unaware that in his office 3 floors above, Park Jae-min was watching her every move on a newly installed camera system. If you're enjoying the story so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me what you think is going to happen next. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is full of stories like this one, stories that will keep you guessing until the very end. Now back to the story. Jaemin had been watching the footage for 3 nights straight. At first, he'd been convinced that Mrs. Han was right, that this foreign chef was stealing from him. It wouldn't be the first time staff had taken advantage of his absence from the day-to-day operations of the household. He was busy with business, with deals that required his full attention, with maintaining the empire his mother had started, and he'd expanded into something far more profitable and far more dangerous. He'd let Mrs. Han run the house because she was efficient, because she asked no questions, because she understood that discretion was more valuable than loyalty. If she said someone was stealing, they probably were. But the footage told a different story. Yes, Lena was taking food. But she wasn't sneaking it out of the house or selling it. She was cooking with it, making simple meals, and taking them to the West Wing, to his mother's room. The room he hadn't entered in over a year. Jaemin felt something twist in his chest as he watched Lena spoon soup into his mother's mouth, watched the way his mother's skeletal hands gripped Lena's arm with desperate gratitude. When was the last time he'd seen his mother? Really seen her, not just signed off on reports about her condition? He'd been told she had dementia, that she didn't recognize anyone anymore, that feeding her had become nearly impossible. The doctors had recommended a care facility, but Mrs. Han had convinced him that his mother would be more comfortable at home, that the staff could manage her care. It had been easier to believe that than to confront the reality of his mother's decline.
Except she wasn't in decline.
Or at least, not the kind of decline he'd been led to believe. The woman in that footage was weak, yes, frighteningly thin, but her eyes were clear when she looked at Lena. She was speaking, responding, fully present. Jaemin's hand tightened on the mouse as he scrolled back through archived footage. He went back weeks, then months, looking for something he'd missed. And he found it. He found moments when Mrs. Han entered his mother's room alone, found footage of meals being brought in and taken out minutes later, untouched. He found his mother trying to get out of bed and Mrs. Han pushing her back down, roughly, without gentleness. He found, in one particularly damning clip, Mrs. Han slapping a plate of food away from his mother's reaching hand, her face twisted in contempt as she said something in Korean that the camera didn't pick up but that made his mother flinch and turn away. The rage that filled Jae-min was unlike anything he'd felt in years. He'd built his life on control, on calculated decisions, on never letting emotion override logic. But this was his mother. The woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, who'd been the only person in his life who'd loved him without conditions or expectations. And he'd let this happen. He'd been so consumed with business, so focused on expanding his power and wealth, that he'd neglected the one person who'd given him everything. The realization was crushing. But rage, at least, was something he knew how to use. He called Mrs. Han to his office at midnight. She arrived promptly, efficient as always, no doubt expecting another routine meeting about household management. "Sit," Jae-min said, not looking up from his computer screen. Mrs. Han sat, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. She'd worked for the family for 15 years. She thought she was untouchable. Jae-min turned his monitor toward her and pressed play. The footage showed Lena entering the West Wing, showed her feeding his mother, showed his mother eating gratefully. Mrs. Han's face remained impassive, but Jae-min saw her hands tighten almost imperceptibly in her lap. "Explain," Jae-min said simply. "The foreign chef is stealing food and bringing it to Madame Seo against doctor's orders," Mrs. Han said smoothly. "Madame Seo is on a restricted diet because of her condition. This woman is endangering her health. I was about to report it to you." Jae-min nodded slowly, then switched to another clip. This one showed Mrs. Han entering his mother's room, roughly handling her, knocking food away. The audio was poor, but even without understanding every word, the cruelty was evident. Mrs. Han's face finally showed emotion.
"Fear."
"Would you like to revise your explanation?" Jae-min asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sir, you don't understand the full situation. Your mother, she became difficult to manage. She was making accusations against the staff, threatening to cause problems for the business. The doctor agreed that she needed to be kept calm, kept quiet, for her own good and for yours. You starved my mother. We managed her for you," Mrs. Han said, and there was an edge of defiance in her voice now. "You were busy building the business. You didn't want to deal with her questions, her interference. We solved a problem." "Get out," Jae-min said. "Sir, get out of my house. You have 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave the property. If you're still here after that, I'll have security remove you. And Mrs. Han, if you ever speak about what happened in this house to anyone, you'll discover exactly how far my reach extends." Mrs. Han stood, her face pale. "You're making a mistake. That foreign girl, she's not what you think. She's a nobody. I've served this family for 15 years. You tortured my mother for 15 years, Jae-min interrupted.
"Leave. Now."
After Mrs. Han left, Jae-min sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the frozen image of his mother on the screen. He'd built an empire, commanded respect and fear in equal measure, controlled businesses and people across continents. But he'd failed at the most basic thing: protecting his own mother. The next morning, Jae-min summoned all the senior staff to the main dining room. Mr. Kwon, the other kitchen supervisors, the head of security, the senior household staff. They filed in nervously, sensing that something had changed, but not sure what. Jae-min stood at the head of the table, a screen behind him. Without preamble, he began playing the footage. Clip after clip of his mother being neglected, mistreated, starved. The staff watched in growing horror, some of them clearly seeing this for the first time, others looking guilty because they'd known and said nothing. When the footage ended, Jae-min let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "Mrs. Han has been dismissed," he said finally. "Mr. Kwon, you're dismissed as well. Anyone who knew what was happening and said nothing has until tonight to leave. Anyone who participated directly should leave the country because if I find you, the consequences will be severe." "Sir," one of Dee's senior maids spoke up, her voice shaking. "We were following orders. Mrs. Han said it was what you wanted, that Madame Seo was causing problems." "Get out," Jae-min said quietly. All of you.
Out.
They left quickly, scrambling over each other in their haste to escape his presence. Only Nurse Ji-won remained, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said. I tried once to help her, and Mrs. Han threatened me. I should have tried harder. I should have told you. You're not fired, Jae-min said. But you'll answer to someone new now. He found Lena in the kitchen, mechanically preparing breakfast with the few remaining staff members who hadn't been in the loop about his mother's treatment. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from weeks of late-night cooking. When she saw him, she went very still, clearly expecting to be fired or worse. Come with me, Jae-min said. Lena followed him through the house, her heart pounding. She'd never been this close to Park Jae-min before. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and barely restrained violence. Everything about him screamed danger. He led her to the West Wing, to his mother's room, and pushed open the door. Madame Seo was awake, sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in months, but still frighteningly fragile. When she saw her son, her face crumpled. Jae-min, she whispered. Jae-min crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, taking his mother's thin hands in his. Lena watched as this cold, dangerous man began to cry, his shoulders shaking with sobs he couldn't control. I'm sorry, he said in Korean, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Yama.
I didn't know.
I should have known. I should have come to see you. Madame Seo touched her son's face with trembling fingers. You're here now, she said. That's what matters. They spoke in Korean for several minutes while Lena stood awkwardly by the door, not sure if she should leave or stay. Finally, Jae-min turned to her, his face still wet with tears, but his eyes hard with purpose. How long? He asked in English. 3 weeks, Lena said. Since I found her. You risked your job. Your safety. Yes. Why? Lena thought about the question, about all the easy answers she could give. Because it was the right thing to do. Because no one else would. Because she couldn't walk away. All of those things were true, but the real answer was simpler. Because she reminded me of my grandmother, Lena said finally. Because I know what it's like to be alone in a foreign place with no one to help you. Because someone had to. Jae-min studied her for a long moment. I'm going to bring in doctors. Real doctors, not the ones Mrs. Han bribed. They'll assess my mother's condition properly and create a real care plan. But she trusts you. She's comfortable with you. So I'm asking you to stay. Not as a kitchen assistant. As her primary caregiver, with full authority over her care and direct oversight of any staff who work with her. I'm a chef, not a nurse, Lena said. You saved my mother's life when trained medical professionals were complicit in harming her. I'll hire nurses to handle the medical aspects. I'm asking you to be there to make sure no one ever hurts her again. To be someone she can trust. Lena looked at Madame Seo, who was watching the exchange with tears in her eyes. The old woman nodded slightly, a plea in her expression. Okay, Lena said. I'll stay. Thank you, Jae-min said, and the relief in his voice was genuine. I'll have contracts drawn up. You'll be well compensated and protected. You'll have access to whatever resources you need. And Lena? I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. Over the next few weeks, the house transformed. Real doctors came and examined Madame Seo, creating a nutrition plan to rebuild her strength safely. Physical therapists worked with her to regain muscle mass. New staff were hired, carefully vetted by Jae-min personally. And slowly, Madame Seo began to recover. But Lena saw things that troubled her. She saw the way Jae-min's business associates visited the house at odd hours. She heard phone conversations in multiple languages that ended abruptly when she entered rooms. She saw documents left carelessly on desks that referenced things she wished she hadn't seen. Park Jae-min was exactly what she'd suspected from the beginning, a criminal. Sophisticated, powerful, but criminal nonetheless. His businesses were fronts for money laundering. His associates were dangerous people. The wealth that surrounded her had been built on activities that destroyed lives. And now she was part of it. By accepting his offer, by taking his money, by staying in this house, she'd become complicit. She told herself it was for Madame Seo that the old woman needed her. But late at night, alone in her much nicer room in the main house, Lena wondered what price she'd eventually pay for this choice. One evening, 2 months after the purge of the household staff, Lena was reading to Madame Seo when Jae-min entered the room. He'd started visiting his mother regularly now, sometimes multiple times a day, as if trying to make up for all the lost time. How is she today? He asked. Strong, Lena said. We walked in the garden this morning, all the way to the fountain and back. Jae-min smiled, a rare expression that transformed his face. Yama always loved that fountain. My father installed it for her birthday 1 year. Your father was a good man, Madame Seo said in English, her accent heavy, but her meaning clear. You have his strength, Jae-min. But you need his heart too. This life you're living, this business, it will destroy you like it almost destroyed me. Jae-min's smile faded. The business keeps you safe. Keeps us powerful. The business is a cage, Madame CEO said. And it turns men into monsters who can walk past their own mother's room for a year and never check to see if she's really okay. The words hung in the air, harsh but true. Jaemin's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I should go, Lena said, sensing this was becoming a private conversation. No, stay, Madame CEO said, gripping Lena's hand. You're part of this family now too, whether you like it or not. And you should hear this because it affects you. Lena sat back down reluctantly as Madame CEO turned her sharp gaze to her son. I want to change my will, the old woman said. I want legal guarantees that if something happens to me, Lena will be protected. And I want you to promise me that you'll start finding a way out of this life before it costs you everything. Yama. Promise me, Jaemin. He was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Lena saw the weight he carried, the choices that had led him down this path, the impossibility of simply walking away from the empire he'd built. I promise to try, he finally said. That's all I can give you. Madame CEO nodded, accepting this small concession. Then try. For me. And thank you for bringing Lena into our lives. She gave me back my son. After Jaemin left, Lena helped Madame CEO get ready for bed. The old woman was tired but content, stronger every day. You should leave, Madame CEO said suddenly as Lena was adjusting her pillows. While you still can. Before you're in too deep. I thought you wanted me to stay, Lena said. I do. Selfishly, I do. But I also care about you, and this house is dangerous. My son is dangerous, not because he wants to be, but because he doesn't know how to be anything else anymore. The people he works with, the life he leads, it will pull you in. And one day you'll wake up and realize you've become part of something you can't escape. Is that what happened to you? Lena asked quietly. My husband started it, Madame CEO said. Small things at first. Favors for friends. Looking the other way. Taking money he shouldn't have taken. By the time I realized what we'd become, it was too late. The money that raised my son, that paid for his education, that built this house, it was all blood money. And now he's in even deeper than his father ever was. So, why did you try to stop him? Lena asked. That's why they did this to you, isn't it? Because you threatened to expose everything. Madame CEO's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm old and dying anyway. I thought if I could save him, if I could make him see what he'd become, it would be worth it. But instead they locked me away, and he believed their lies because it was easier than facing the truth. He knows the truth now, Lena said. Yes, Madame CEO agreed. But will it change anything? Or will he just be more careful about who he trusts? Lena didn't have an answer to that. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This story isn't quite over yet, and I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. And drop a comment below telling me what you think happens next because trust me, there's more to this story than you might expect. Should Lena stay or should she run? Let me know what you would do. Now, let's see how this all plays out. The answer to Madame CEO's question came 3 weeks later when men in expensive suits arrived at the house late one night. Lena was in the kitchen making tea when she heard raised voices from Jaemin's office. She should have stayed away, should have minded her own business, but something in the tone of the argument made her move closer. Can't keep protecting her, one of the men was saying in English. She knows too much. She's a liability. She's my mother, Jaemin's voice cold as ice. She tried to turn you in once. She'll do it again. And now you've fired half your staff. People are asking questions. The authorities are asking questions. Let them ask. You're not thinking clearly. This American woman you've brought in, she's seen things too. How long before she? The sound of glass shattering. Jaemin's voice, deadly quiet. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, walk away now. While you still can. We're just saying you need to be smart about this. Your mother, the chef, they're weak points. In our business, weak points get people killed. Get out of my house. Jaemin, get out before I do something we'll both regret. Lena pressed herself against the wall as footsteps approached. The men passed her hiding spot without seeing her, their faces cold and angry. After they'd left, she stood frozen, her mind racing. They'd been talking about killing Madame CEO. Killing her. And Lena herself was apparently also a liability now. She should run. She should pack her bags and disappear before this situation got worse. But where would she go? She'd signed contracts, had been well paid, had become part of this family's secrets. If Jaemin's associates saw her as a threat, would they let her simply walk away? That night, Lena lay awake in her room, listening to the ocean and trying to decide what to do. Stay and risk becoming collateral damage in whatever war was brewing. Or run and risk being hunted. Neither option felt safe. The choice was taken from her the next morning when Jaemin summoned her to his office. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept, and there was a hardness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. You heard last night, he said. It wasn't a question. I heard voices, Lena said carefully. Don't lie to me. You heard what they said about my mother. About you. Lena nodded slowly. I heard. I want you to understand something, Jaemin said, leaning forward. I will never let anyone hurt my mother again. Ever. Whatever that costs me, whatever I have to do. Do you understand? Yes. And that protection extends to you now. You saved her life. That creates a bond, a debt of honor that I take seriously. As long as you're in this house, you're under my protection. But that means you can't leave. The words sent a chill down Lena's spine. What do you mean I can't leave? I mean exactly what I said. If you leave, if you walk away, my associates will see it as a security risk. They'll act on that perception. But if you stay, if you remain part of the household, you're protected by me. No one touches what's mine. So, I'm a prisoner, Lena said flatly. Your family, Jae-min corrected. Whether you wanted to be, or not. The weight of her choices crashed over Lena. She'd walked into the West Wing to save a starving woman, and in doing so, she'd chained herself to this house, to this family, to this dangerous life. There was no going back now. What happens next? She asked quietly. Next, we survive, Jae-min said. I'm consolidating power, cutting ties with the people who can't be trusted. It's going to be dangerous for a while. There will be attempts to force my hand, to make me prove my loyalty by eliminating weak points. I need you to stay close to my mother, keep her safe. Trust no new staff members. If anything feels wrong, you come to me immediately. And what about when this is all over? Lena asked. If it's ever over? Jae-min's smile was sad and knowing. If it's ever over, and if we all survive, then maybe you can have your life back. Maybe we all can. But that's a very big if. And so Lena stays, trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, caring for Madame Seo while the world outside spirals into chaos. She watches as Jae-min navigates the treacherous waters of his criminal empire, making moves and countermoves, building walls to protect what matters while the foundation threatens to crumble. She sees the toll it takes on him, the way each hard decision chips away at whatever humanity he has left. And she wonders if Madame Seo is right, if trying to save the son was just as futile as trying to save the mother, different forms of the same impossible task. But every morning, she wakes up and makes breakfast for Madame Seo, walks with her in the garden, reads to her in the evening. These small acts of care, these moments of normalcy in an increasingly abnormal life, become Lena's anchor. And when Madame Seo holds her hand and says, "Thank you for staying," Lena tells herself that maybe this prison isn't so bad if it means keeping this woman alive, keeping her safe, keeping her loved. Even if the cost is everything Lena used to be.